Hi, I'm Tony Van Veen, CEO of Discmaker. In recent weeks, there have been a number of breathless articles and reports in blogs and magazines, including Rolling Stone and Pitchfork and Hypebot, about the CD revival that started in 2021. And indeed, it looks like industry unit sales of CDs were up a modest 2% in 2021. The first time, however, in 17 years that there was any growth in CDs. Great, right? Then about a week later, there was another article on the blog Dada Drummer that said, no, there's no CD revival. It's mostly just Adele's album, which sold over 900,000 units, by the way. And that album by itself pushed the CD format up for the year. And so their somewhat dubious reasoning that Adele's CD sales should be excluded from market data led them to conclude that in fact CD units continued to be down about 2% last year. So up, down, which is it? And does it actually matter to anyone but me because I happen to run a CD manufacturing company? Well, I've done some digging and I'm going to tell you what I found. And I'm going to focus specifically on the independent artist, the unsigned artist like you who was releasing their own CDs, which is frankly a category that no one has reported on, mostly because there's no data available. And the conclusions I come to are pretty interesting if I say so myself. Number one, the vast majority of self-released CDs are not tracked by Nielsen SoundScan or by anybody else. Number two, unsigned artists represent a surprising 22% of all CDs sold in the US. Number three, for emerging artists, CD sales have declined much less over the past decade than for major artists. And number four, CD sales among DIY artists are up slightly in 2021, but to be honest, we are comparing to the worst year in recent CD sales history. So let me dig into each of these points a little more, starting with the vast majority of self-released CDs not being tracked by anybody. I mean, this shouldn't really surprise you, right? But DIY artists have always had a hard time getting their physical products, their CDs, their vinyl, stocked in stores and at distributors. And that's because retailers just don't have confidence that your CDs will actually sell through. And of course, over the past 20 years, the number of retail stores selling CDs has decreased drastically. So what self-released indie artists do instead is to sell their CDs at shows to make a few bucks while performing. Plus, of course, some artists sell their CDs on their Bandcamp page or on their own website. And of course, they give away some as promos. But it seems pretty clear to me that with most self-released CDs sold at concerts, there will be no sales tracking for the vast majority of these discs sold at live events. They're mostly small venues that don't report automatically to Nielsen SoundScan, and for practical purposes, artists just don't bother to report their live music CD sales to anybody. Now, my next claim, that unsigned artists represent a surprising 22% of all CDs sold in the US, comes from our own data. Let's check out this graph representing the US sales of albums by format, as reported by Nielsen SoundScan. Here we see that the CD unit sales, in light green, did indeed go up industry-wide in 2021, after a pretty long slide over the past decade. It's actually more than a decade, but the chart gives us data from 2011 to 2021. We also see that vinyl in black has grown significantly from almost nothing a decade ago, and that downloads are continuing to decline. Now here's what's interesting. According to Nielsen SoundScan, there were 40.6 million CDs sold in the US in 2021. Discmakers alone last year sold almost 12 million CDs to unsigned independent artists. And if you agree with my first point, that most of those indie CD sales are not represented in the 40.6 million that are tracked by Nielsen SoundScan, that meant that the total CD market in the US last year is closer to 52 million units. And our 12 million make up a bit over 22% of that 52 million. And while Discmakers is by far the biggest manufacturer for independent artists, we're not the only one out there. So the actual number of CDs made for DIY artists is even larger than reported. So if you think about it, that means that 1 in 5 CDs sold last year in the US was self-released. That's a pretty impressive stat, and it shows the loyalty that fans have towards emerging artists and how eagerly they will support them by buying their discs and their merch at concerts. Okay, so 1 CD sold in 5 is pretty cool, but is the CD market actually seeing a revival? So let's look at my final point, that the CD sales for emerging artists declined less than for major artists over the past decade, and that CD orders for unsigned artists were up in 2021. For starters, take another look at the sales chart I just showed. You can definitely see the downward arc of the curve is flattening industry-wide. In fact, you can see that unit sales declined from around 230 million CD units in 2011 to 40.6 million in 2021. That's an 82% decline in CD sales for the US music industry over 10 years. What about the indie artists? Okay, so I'm going to make 2 assumptions here. Number 1, I know Discmakers, as the only factory that works directly with emerging artists, is by far the largest CD manufacturer for emerging artists in the US. And while we have nowhere near 100% of that market, I'm going to assume that the trends that we are experiencing are a reasonable representation of the trends that the overall industry is experiencing for DIY artists. Sound fair? My second assumption is that looking at units manufactured for unsigned artists may not be the right metric, at least not the optimal metric. After all, we don't know how many of those discs that we've made for emerging artists are actually sold to fans at concerts versus still sitting in a carton in a basement versus having been handed out as promos. Any of a number of things could happen. But what I think might be a better indicator of how the CD market is trending for DIY artists is to look instead at CD order trends, the number of new orders and reorders combined for disc manufacturing that we receive at Discmakers. So this captures both the interest in continuing to press new CDs and the number of times an existing CD title actually sold enough units to be reordered. Now check out this chart of Discmaker CD orders for the past 11 years, from 2011 to 2021. Same time period as the industry chart that I showed you earlier. You can see the orders each year in blue bars, and then in orange you can see some distinct trend lines for 3 time periods. So let me make a few obvious observations. Yes, over the past 11 years, there have been some notable declines, which shouldn't surprise anyone, right? Over this time period, CD orders have declined by about 44%, as compared to the industry declines that I just mentioned of 82%. That means that CD sales in the mainstream music industry declined twice as fast as CD sales for unsigned artists. And that is, in my opinion, a clear result of the fact that streaming pays so little that artists still have to rely on the revenue stream from physical media. It's interesting how CD orders held relatively flat from 2011 to 2016, despite the industry shift to download sales and to streams during that time period. And again, that points to the strength of the CD format as a revenue generator as concerts. After all, you can't sell a download or a stream at your concerts. Now you can see after 2016, when streaming had become the dominant revenue model industry-wide, we did see some notable declines in CD orders. However, orders started to stabilize in 2019, and then in 2020, the pandemic and the venue shutdown created the biggest percentage drop in orders the format had ever seen, which again supports my position that most unsigned artist CDs are sold at concerts. Finally, there was indeed a modest 2.5% CD order growth from DIY artists in 2021, which mirrors the 2% or so CD unit growth for the broader music industry. Although, in all fairness, we are comparing that growth to the worst year in CD sales history. So is there a CD revival? Well, one swallow does not make a spring. It feels a bit too early to call it a revival, but the format declines have certainly slowed way down, and they seem to want to start slowly rising, as implausible as that might have seemed just a couple years ago. One more point. There is also some anecdotal evidence that the decline of the CD format is coming to an end. My friend Sean Rutkowski, who for many years ran the vinyl pressing plant Independent Record Pressing, about half an hour up the road from Discmakers, and who's a huge vinyl aficionado, mentioned to me recently that the recent trends that he has noticed for CDs at retail, at mom and pop record stores, at used record stores, are starting to look like the trends that he was seeing for vinyl way back in 2008, just as that format started slowly growing again. Prices for used CDs in stores are rising. The selection is getting poorer because more people are kind of picking through the racks, and used CD players are harder to find at thrift stores. This sentiment is actually echoed by a cool recent Pitchfork article that talks about the love some Gen Zers have for the CD format. In fact, in addition to the vinyl TikTok that's become a phenomenon, there is also now CD TikTok. If you're interested in reading the article, I'll post a link to it in the video description below. Conclusion? The CD revival may not be quite here yet, but it might be right around the corner. And you, dear artists, could say you were right there when it started. So don't wait too long to place that order before our presses fill all up again. If you have an opinion on this topic, please leave a comment below. I check them all and I respond to many. Hope you found this helpful. I look forward to seeing you next time.